Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar in conjunction with iMotions and Mauro Usability Science. Today, we're going to be talking about advanced human factors research methods for medical device and medical device optimization. Wanted to thank my colleagues at iMotions for arranging the webinar and for coordinating everything on the back end. During the session today, we'll intersperse the presentation with some questions. The questions will be submitted by yourself, the audience. They can be submitted in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. I'd like to move first of all. I'd like to say good morning to all of our colleagues on the West Coast, also our friends in the middle of the US, Chicago area, and all of our friends in Europe. Today we have a very wide audience, actually ranging across the entire globe, Asia, Central Asia, United States, Europe, and Scandinavia. So welcome to all in our session today. I'd like to start first with a very brief overview of our firm, what we're all about. It's a simple one-page corporate history. We were founded in 1975. We're located in New York, and we deliver human factors research on a global basis. We have very deep experience, a couple of thousand projects, and we are certified human factors engineering professionals. We've won numerous prestigious research awards from the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, the Association for Computing Machinery, NASA, IDSA, and an Emmy Award for specialized research in virtual worlds. We have many leading medical clients, Pfizer, Merck, West, etc., several others. Our non-medical clients include Google, Nike, Dyson, Goldman Sachs, DoD, NASA, and others. We have extensive experience in intellectual property issues related to design and devices and GUI design. We've testified as experts in over 75 major design patent and utility patent cases. We're widely published. We speak frequently at MIT, Stanford, UPenn, and have lectured at the FDA and Human Factors and Ergonomics Society as well. We're probably best known for our development of advanced user research methods. This work goes back almost 40 years. And we do provide extensive traditional research in medical device development, human factors engineering, and usability testing at both the formative and summative stages. However, today's presentation is going to focus primarily on advanced user research methods for the development of medical devices. So the scope of today's discussion, we're going to talk about devices, instructions for use, package design, and how these advanced methods apply. We'll also touch on apps and software, but the primary focus of today's discussion will be devices, instructions, and package. And then iMotions has an upcoming webinar on medical HCI, where we'll dive into that, or they'll dive into that in greater detail. So how are human factors performance of medical products determined today? This is an important question for anyone who's going to be developing medical devices or does so. The primary driving force is, of course, in the United States, the FDA, under HE 75 and other human factors guidelines, which provide these very broad requirements for the overall usability of a product. So you can think of the human factors performance of products being dictated to some extent by FDA guidance. Most products have late stage user testing, either formative or summative studies. And what's important about this type of progression is that these studies are focused on validation. In other words, passing the FDA requirements and not necessarily on human factors optimization. You might think that those two things go together, but in fact, some cases they don't. What's important about the discussion today is these advanced methods we're going to talk about are actually designed to address what is becoming a growing and increasingly important problem of the patient usability problem. And what we're finding when you look at actual research data is that medical products are actually reaching patients in the field with relatively poor human factors performance, even after they've passed FDA human factors approval. And so there's some interesting research going on as to why this is actually happening. So why do medical products, sort of in general, this is not a totally universal statement, but compared to other industries, medical products do have relatively poor human factors performance. What is the reason for that? Well, I mean, basically it breaks down into three key points. Human factors research in medical devices uses generally outdated research methods. These are observational research, self-reported response data, where you're observing someone in a lab utilizing a device and you're asking their opinion, you're recording errors. These are methods that go back at least 100 years. We now know, based on more recent research, that there are current problems with study design itself and the failure for many human factors research teams to recruit the proper patient sample during actual user testing. And we've written about this in some depth. I'll talk briefly about it today. But probably the most important business problem related to human factors design of medical devices is that as these devices have become more complex, there's actually a tremendous amount of missing data required to design these devices, both in terms of the physical attributes of these devices, how much force is required to activate injection buttons, for example, all the way up to cognitive issues related to instructions for use. So this missing data is really starting to become a very important issue for medical device manufacturers. So talking about the missing data problem, I just have a list of typical missing data. If you were going to design, for example, a contemporary on-body injector or a somewhat slightly more complex device, there's no data, sparse data on activation, on grip biomechanics, spatial orientation and alignment, physiological effort, body part drug delivery impact. In other words, if you use an auto injector on one part of your body, is a different performance than on another part. Visual detection of signals. Many of these new devices have flashing lights, if you will. Audio detection, package design, the forces and the mechanical alignment of opening methodologies required to access the device inside the package. Reading level versus primary language and instructions for use. General cognitive performance, very poor data on that. Learning and learning decay, these are known to be important issues in proper use of medical devices over time. And environmental variables, how the patient's residence or place of where they deliver the drug, how that impacts the design of the device itself. So what's important about this today is that there's actually a tremendous amount of missing data. And so what does this mean? It means that most human factors decisions related to medical device design today are based primarily on intuition of the engineering and design team. Now, don't get me wrong, there is some data around that exists for some aspects of these devices, but if you compare the complexity of the device to the required data to optimize these devices from a human factors point of view, there's a major missing data problem. So let's look very briefly at this issue of user profile. It's an extremely interesting problem that's come up recently in the last couple of years. The current FDA guidance says that devices should be designed to meet the range of physical and cognitive limitations of the drug-specific patient population. Now, what most studies actually test is not the physical or cognitive limitations, but studies today that are submitted to the FDA for validation are based on recruiting of individuals' clinical condition only, and they don't actually screen for diminished cognitive capabilities or physical capabilities. So what this looks like sort of structurally is some of you probably know, human attributes in general, either it's anthropometry or strength or cognitive capability, are generally normally distributed in a given healthy population. And when you look at the human factors engineering design guidelines, in other words, how does one design for a population that's normally distributed? The recommended range of design criteria is the 95th to the 5th percentile. This is minimum recommended design. So what this means technically is that you need to design the device so that it responds effectively to this range of users. And what's important about this is that this guidance and this data is really generated from healthy adult populations. But what we know now in our research is that the most important user group is really not 2 standard deviations, but 3 standard deviations away from the mean. And these are individuals who are at the lower ends of functional capability, both cognitively and physically. And these are the individuals, when you look at the research data, which I mentioned previously, about why these devices are reaching patients with relatively poor human factors performance, it's primarily because we're not really designing for those individuals who have these specific needs. So we've written extensively about this. My team, Chris on my team, and Peter Paroli from the Institute of Human and Machine Cognition wrote an extensive paper about this. It's up on SSRN. If you'd like to, have a copy, you feel free to ask us, or you can just pull it down directly from SSRN. And it deals very specifically with these issues, which I've just discussed. And actually, this paper was rated in the top 10% of SSRN last year. I believe we might have a question at this point.
Yeah, Charles. So as these research techniques are not optimized by human factor standards, how do you consult with clients who come in with a problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. The clients come to the need for advanced research methodologies based on 3 types of needs. I think 5 years ago or so, clients came to us if they had a specific human factors engineering problem that they had tried to resolve through traditional methods and simply couldn't. And so utilizing advanced methods, we would resolve that problem. More recently, clients have started to come to the utilization of our service based on the realization that advanced methods provide actually a significant improvement in the performance of their product. And then the third reason is that clients are increasingly coming to these advanced methods and our business specifically to help them develop human engineering design requirements utilizing advanced research methods. So for example, the activation pressure on an auto injector, activation force, those sorts of studies where you're being asked to recruit the proper population and generate actual statistical data that can be used in the development of these devices. So I see these now as it's a changing trend, heading now toward the establishment of good human factors performance as a market advantage, basically.
Right.
Okay, so we talked about the topic of human factors optimization and advanced research methods. What I have here is a slide just ticking down a list of the methodologies which our firm utilizes and which are generally regarded as advanced research methods. High performance eye tracking, both screen-based or glasses. Eye tracking's been around for a long time. Nothing particularly innovative about it, except when it's combined with other advanced methods, and it is new in that context. We use GSR, microfacial, very interesting, relatively new methodology. Newtonian force measurement. This is the ability to measure forces on various types of medical devices. EMGs, that's electromyography, muscular effort, if you will. We have specialized systems for 3D spatial tracking. This allows us to track at a sub-millimeter level the physical manipulation of a device in space and time. So if we want to know, for example, whether a patient can properly align a injection device properly, can hold it for a sufficient period of time, 3D tracking is very helpful. EEG, this is brain cortex activity. We integrate cognitive modeling, applied cognitive task analysis, and information foraging theory. Cognitive workload analysis, that work comes from several different types of sensor modalities. Learning and learning decay. Neuroaesthetics, this is relatively new research we've been conducting on the impact of the aesthetic design of products in the medical products and how they impact patient adoption and fear. Robust heuristics, another methodology. Remote user testing, something that's been very popular since the onset of COVID. And large sample online surveys to assess user engagement. So the point I want to make is that this is a very large palette of methodologies. When you talk about advanced user research, what you're really talking about is the integration of 2 or 3 or 4 of these methodologies to solve a specific problem. There are no studies that use all of these methods, as I've indicated here. Do we have another question, Tom? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, we do. And so with the breadth of human factors methodologies, how do you operationalize and synthesize them? And how does iMotions help you with this?
Well, as I just mentioned, the primary methodology is like any scientific inquiry is to define the nature of the investigation first. What problem you're trying to solve. And once you've identified the sort of the core human factors engineering problem related to a specific device, then you can choose from the palette of technologies that you can integrate together to address the specific problem. And actually, Tom, I have a number of slides coming up where I'll talk about how we utilize iMotions to solve this problem. But pardon me, prior to iMotions, this type of work was extremely difficult because you could not integrate all of the various data streams together into one view. And that is at its core what is brilliant about iMotions and what it does really better than anything else that's been out before. As a matter of fact, these next few slides sort of lead on to a somewhat slighter in-depth review of that. So if you want to use these specific advanced methods, what are the challenges prior to iMotions? The amount of data produced. For example, one 3D spatial tracking respondent produces almost a gigabyte of data. Data stream integration, this is what I mentioned iMotions does for us. Calibration and reliability, always a concern for scientific work. The expertise required to understand the data. In human factors research, this type of advanced systems actually produce the requirement for a different type of expertise in addition to human factors. Statistical analysis, now when you have real science data, you have real stats. Hardware and vendor support, sometimes the vendors don't always tell you the truth. It's not true with iMotions, they always tell you the brutal truth. Software compliance, the FDA has certain requirements, CFR 21 Part 11 compliance, for example. Pilot testing to make sure everything works, study design, IRB approval, and of course, cost and time. It takes, a long time to make these advanced studies really operational before the advent of the iMotions data integration stream. So if you really look at, of all of these variables, what is probably the single biggest breakthrough in the last decade, and I've been doing advanced user testing for probably 30 years, it's the iMotions platform, because if you can't get all the data streams together and synced, you can't make this type of work cost effective. So if you want to just look quickly at the scale of the problem, this is a typical study. We might have Newtonian force, 3D spatial, EMGs, microfacial, and eye tracking. The sampling rate varies. The raw data format that the system produces is different. The size of the data file varies. The point here, very simply, is that in a typical 60-minute human factors evaluation, let's say of 3 concept auto injectors, you produce a staggering amount of data. And in human factors research terms, this is what we characterize as the equivalent of truly big data from the standpoint of data integration. And it's really only been through the introduction of iMotions where we've been able to sort of pull all of these data streams into one cohesive view. Now, that's not to say that we haven't tried it before iMotions, and I have actually a case study here which we'll take you through. So this is just a very short case study. It's advanced data capture on an auto injector design. This is integrating Newtonian force, EMGs, 3D spatial, microfacial, and eye tracking. And what this system does basically, and this was just prior to iMotions, we used another system called Naraxin, a very expensive, high-end clinical level system where we integrated our data streams together. I'll just run a very short video. And what you'll see here is a respondent with a video with the auto injector, which has the embedded force sensors and motion sensors, and EMG data and 3D spatial tracking data all coming in at one time. So here you see the individual with the auto-injector. These are the EMGs. Over here to your right, you see the 3D spatial tracker. It's a visualization of the sub-millimeter level of spatial tracking. And in the Neuraxin system, you would see here on the bottom the force tracks coming in on the upper layer are the EMGs, and here on a separate terminal in a separate data stream actually is the 3D spatial tracker. So when you think about advanced data, advanced testing methods, these are really sort of the framework that we were working on, but really the upper limit was about 3 data streams, and that was it with the Neuraxin system. This is what I have that follows now is some actual data from a couple of studies. This is the auto-injector, which we were just looking at, not that specific one. The red line is the skin plane, and what you see here is the injector being pushed down into the abdomen, the needle release, and the actual micro level motion of the auto-injector in the hand of the user for over a 16.5-second injection period, and then the lift of the auto-injector, needle withdrawal, and then removal from the skin. This also had EMG tracking and force as well. So what you see here is a very robust level of insight into how the devices can actually be manipulated. This is interesting data. The red dots here are the point of entry of the injection of the needle tip. And what you're seeing here is 3D spatial tracking data that shows the needle tip excursion for device 1 versus device 2. And these were 2 different auto-injector designs over a 15-second injection period. But what this provides, of course, is very robust science-based data on how device design actually impacts, in this case, both pain and comfort as a function of needle excursion. This is data where we were examining 3 different auto-injector configurations, looking at osteoporosis patients age 78 and older. What this data shows essentially is that we have a statistically significant difference in maximum comfortable operational force between these devices. Now, why is this important? This level of advanced testing allows you to actually optimize from a scientific point of view the design of your device, and in such a way that you may actually want to apply for intellectual property rights on that innovation. So this has IP implications and obviously clinical outcomes implications. We can instrument very small devices. This, for example, is a traditional syringe injection. Here we were looking at plunger activation force, 3D tracking. This particular study was looking at the impact of drug viscosity. Some drugs today have large molecules, they have higher viscosity. And the chart on the right shows the accumulated respondent motions of needle tips for 3 different levels of viscosity of the drug. And the dark red points out which was the highest viscosity, shows objectively that with very high viscosities, you have very significant needle injection and needle tip movement. Again, a function of that's important for improving performance. As another study, we were looking at whether viscosity levels here. The small chart on the bottom shows the percentage of participants who could not inject the drug at these various viscosity levels. Now, why is this important? Some manufacturers have made the assumption with new drugs that their easiest and most direct route to delivery is through a standard PFS, a syringe style injector. But the actual human factors performance of such devices, even though they're seemingly simple, is much more complex as viscosity increases. So in this case, the client was saved from a very large investment in PFS devices that would not have been usable. This is very interesting data from a study we looked at. The needle excursion, this is the same device, but needle excursion is a function of where on the human body you inject, thigh injections versus abdomen injections. And in fact, you can design a device to be optimized for one or the other, or if you're so inclined, you can design a device to be optimized for both. We have a question on that, Tom?
Yeah, we do. So regarding the term comfort that was a few slides back, in these cases, how are you measuring that? And can you use iMotions to measure pain?
Yes, excellent question. Pain and comfort are a major topic of interest today for many reasons. And we combine psychophysical testing. We have a standard metrics, which are self-report. We take the 3D tracking data, which you've just seen here. And the newest and most interesting innovation by far is the use of microfacial. There's been considerable controversy about microfacial as to its efficacy. We had the system in-house for about 9 months before we used it with a client project. We bench tested it extensively. And one of the things that microfacial does incredibly well is measure pain and comfort. So we've added that to our palette. This is an example, interesting example here where we're looking at 2 levels of force. These are the small red and blue boxes on the bottom, and the EMG activity for the major muscle groups. Now, why this is important, once we've run enough respondents, we can actually predict fatigue and acceptance by not having to instrument the device with force sensors any longer. We can predict that from statistical analysis of the waveforms from the EMG data. So huge savings of time. We always have patient opinion data. I'm sure many of you who conduct this type of research are familiar with this. It's important to note that iMotions allows you to integrate Qualtrics directly into the data stream. So you have a quick question on that, Tom?
Yeah, so just in terms of what you're talking about, it looks like there's many different devices you use for your research. What value does iMotions add when working with so many different tools?
Well, I mean, it makes advanced studies of this type actually possible, because unless you have a group of 10 grad students who are excellent at MATLAB, you're not going to be integrating these data streams in any way that's going to be meaningful. I would say it for us in advanced data human factors research, a massive game changer. And I want to point out to everyone on the webinar today, we're not receiving anything from iMotions for this. We would just like to see more researchers involved at this level and to utilize the platform, because if we all use the same platform, we can then exchange data, and the dialogue scientifically becomes much more robust. Okay, so talking about the iMotions framework briefly, it takes the physiological neurocognitive measures, that's all the stuff we're talking about. It takes the subjective responses, that's the survey data. What most people don't realize is it also take the medical device generated data. This is the Force 3D, any of the sensors that are in the actual device. The physio data goes directly in, the variables, the subjective goes directly in. But what is incredibly powerful about iMotions is their API interface. So whenever we have a specific device, maybe we have new force sensors, we can write an API that allows the iMotions data, allows the data to flow directly into the same data stream with all the other data streams. In terms of experience, we've actually executed about 110 advanced studies. We've run about 1,200 respondents. It's incredibly robust and helpful when it's all the details are worked out. The one additional point I would mention here is that most researchers don't realize this, but one of the great advantages of iMotions is that you can also send signals out from iMotions. So you can actually send API calls and data to the actual device. So for example, this is a project where we were looking at an on-body injector, and this particular device had audio signals, visual signals, flashing lights, if you will, a fill indicator, and we were able to simulate the entire functionality of the product using some baseline software and hardware development, and we were able to derive all of those displays and the coordination of all of that with the data acquisition through iMotions. Okay, so very quickly, how are design concepts fitted and tested? If you had a design concept, say an auto injector, we take the SolidWorks CAD file, we modify the CAD file to integrate the sensors, we 3D print the design concept for the auto injector, for example. We integrate that with iMotions. We run a number of pilot studies, calibrations, and then we iterate. So very simply, if you're starting the development of a medical device and you have 3D SolidWorks CAD file, that's the best time to get involved in this type of testing, but it's not the only time. I'd like to move a little quickly now. I think we'll skip that last question. What I'm going to talk about now is microfacial. For those of you who are not familiar with it, this is a methodology that acquires data from a simple video of facial expressions of respondents as they interact with various devices. What I'm going to show you here is a quick video of an individual viewing two types of drug delivery devices. First is a standard syringe, and the second is an auto-injector. And this research is used to determine the psychological and emotional impact of different types of drug design. So what you'll see is a line running across this horizontally, and on all of these individual scales are different emotive charges that are captured through iMotions and through Affectiva. So here we see the individual looking at the syringe on the top. The flashing orange is the eye tracking data. And we see big peaks here in all of the emotional data. And we also see peaks on the biosensor, the GSR sensor on the bottom. And we're going to see now the auto-injector. And the level of emotional engagement you see here is almost non-existent compared to the previous device. So why is this important? If you're a corporation and you're about to make a very large investment in certain types of drug delivery devices, understanding the emotional impact of these devices is very important. This is another quick study. This we were working for the human factors team, and the marketing research team saw our work, came to us and asked if it might be possible to utilize the Affectiva iMotion system to analyze advertising for physicians. And here again is a short video of a physician looking at viewing a ad. And you can see here in this area where I'm circling, there's high emotional engagement. The top row is engagement, the purple, if you will. And you're going to see a quick drop off very shortly. Okay, here you see the engagement is dropped to near zero. And you're going to see the engagement pick up again here shortly. Okay, so what did we learn from that very short video? What we learned is all of these graphic treatments, logos, animations, physical animations, actually have dramatically reduced cognitive engagement with respect to the communication of critical content for physicians. And this type of methodology is very robust for these types of projects. These are images of physicians viewing different types of auto-injectors. Why is it important to examine physicians looking at auto-injectors versus patients? Turns out that physicians are increasingly the individual who is going to be demonstrating to patients how to use auto-injectors. So their user profile tends to be very important. Instructions for use, we utilize high-performance eye tracking. Here, looking at a IFU. This is the data from a screen-based eye tracking system. As most of you probably know, the eye tracking produces very robust data that can be highly specialized and focused on any aspect of a graphic or printed material, anything that can be a screen presented two-dimensionally, or if you use 3D eye track glasses, anything in 3D space. It's interesting. Actually, I'm going to skip that. I'd like to go on now to package design. This is probably an unusual area. You might not have thought about human factors of package design. But advanced methods, especially the iMotions platform, is very robust. So what are you interested in when you're looking at package design for medical devices? Tamper-resistant enclosure removal forces, opening forces, forces required to actually extract the device, the graphics on the package, that's really information uptake. Where are the instructions for use, configuration of the IFU, methods for securing the device inside the package is forces for removal, returning the package to child-resistant configuration. So what we've done more recently is we take our 3D spatial sensor. We have a number of different modalities, and we embed it in the package, in the medical packaging. And then we ask respondents to undertake a number of tasks, reading the outside of the packaging, opening the package, dealing with the child-resistant attributes of the package. And the 3D sensor tracks the motion in 3D space of the package as they manipulate the package. So why is this interesting? We actually have discovered now that you can predict the human factors performance of a package design simply by looking at the total distance traveled and the number of angles changed as the users manipulate the package in 3D space. And we correlate this data with their subjective response and their error ratings and EMG ratings. So what this shows you is that you can be very creative with how you use these advanced methods. And this is just one example. This is an example of how eye tracking is characteristically not well understood by many researchers. This is an eye tracking study looking at a specific drug package design. So if you just looked at this eye tracking data, you say, well, the area of greatest interest is this area of highest intensity here in the center of the page. What is the drug? The relative quantity of the drug, that sort of information. But if you actually combine that with the iMotions data, where you look at, for example, GSR, you look at eye tracking data, and cognitive workload, you come up with something that's really much different. So, for example, if you look at these areas here where all the peaks appear, this is the emotionally engaging critical component of the scanning of the package by the physician. However, if you compare that to the actual package itself, the area of interest is really on the left, which is side effects related to medical condition. So you can be fooled by eye tracking, and the iMotions platform, utilizing these other channels, is incredibly important for solving these problems. We've done a number of studies with pharmacists, for example. Why do pharmacists make mistakes in medication distribution? A classic problem here, which we identified very important because it was an expensive and a critical cancer drug. It was simply a translation error in a data table. So we're getting toward the end here. The current best practice in advanced user testing is to look at the system, the medical product as it's packaged, the device, the instructions for use, as a unified whole, and then utilize advanced systems like iMotions to optimize the user's performance across all three of these regimes. And this is how you really produce world-class medical devices. And this is how it will be done in the future. Do you have a quick question, Thomas? I don't want to run over on time here.
Actually, yeah, we got a couple of really great questions here. Let me see. So in regards to the emotional engagement, do you see statistical significant differences in emotional engagement, or is it only qualitative?
Excellent, super good, great question. So once you really dig into Affectiva and you understand the iMotions platform, you can pull from those data streams very interesting and robust statistics. By their nature, the simplest view is simply the graphs. But yes, we have been able to provide statistically significant differences in emotional data, both on comfort, pain, and 3D manipulation. And one of the great things about iMotion is, frankly, all your data ends up in the same file. Granted, it is a massive file, but if you're good at Excel or even average at Excel, you can pull the data out, put it into SPSS, which is primarily what we do, and you can produce very robust stats. Was there another question?
Yeah, I think we have time for one more here. So in regards to pain, and can you elaborate on a correlation between pain and measuring that with emotions and iMotions?
Yes. There've been a number of clinical trials executed around this question, and we've looked at pain as a function of injections. And when you saw the auto-injector example and the PFS example that we had there, iMotions, Affectiva through iMotions produces very robust and statistically relevant data on pain. And depending on how you set the values within iMotions, because as you know, it's a very robust statistical platform as well, you get various levels of sensitivity. So it's not, the pain comfort question is not a slam dunk. You really have to examine the system effectively and carefully, look at your study design and the stimulus, what you're actually testing. But if you take the time to do that, you'll produce unbelievably good data. Okay, let's move ahead. So just as I mentioned, iMotions has a very robust screen-based system for desktop, mobile, wearable, and websites. I'm only going to show you one example of this utilization of this today. There'll be a webinar in the future on this. This is a study that we did to look at how design attributes of mobile devices impact cognitive engagement. And this is work related to the question of smartphone addiction. So if, for example, the question here is what impact does color have on cognitive workload? So here we use the iMotions platform. We're looking here at Affectiva, and no, this is actually EEG data, excuse me. And what we see here on the top is engagement. And this is the sort of summary engagement stat that comes from this particular EEG device. And so what you see here is with increase in color utilization, you get a very dramatic increase in engagement. But if you look at these bottom here, this is a cognitive workload. You see the workload is essentially unaffected over the time domain. So this is just one example. In this particular study, we're looking at many different variables. You can create an understanding and a palette of the intersection of design attributes that have various impact structures on both utilization and workload. Just our last example here, this is applied cognitive task analysis. You might think that these advanced methods can only be applied to very advanced studies, with lots of respondents, but we have actually found that these advanced methods are very helpful in small studies. And one area that we work in frequently is applied cognitive task analysis. Very quickly, it's basically a 3-interview style technique: task diagrams, knowledge audit, and a simulation. And these are subject matter expert interviews. They can either be done face-to-face or remotely. This example is an individual in the lab. This data is fed together. It creates a cognitive demands table. And this is all synthesized together. And it allows us to determine the allocation of cognitive demands across all 3 devices, 3 domains: the device, the instructions for use, and the package, and if it has an app or software. So you might think, okay, well, what good is advanced methods for this? Basically an interview technique. This is a project that Chris, who's going to chat briefly, was involved with. This subject matter expert happens to be a patient. We're looking at a blood pressure device here, and we're interested in the relationship and the relative contribution of cognitive complexity between the device and the instructions for use, and where is the actual workload. This is the eye tracking data. Basically identifying one area here in the center, the high cognitive demand. And what this actually allows us to do is very important. This is not a usability study. This is an analysis of human factors requirements. And it allows us to determine what are the cognitive demands between the device and the instructions for use, and how should they be allocated. For example, if the device is actually poorly designed from a human factors point of view, can you make up for it in the instructions for use, or do you actually have to go back and redesign the software on the device? Okay, so as I mentioned in the very beginning, I'm an expert with over 40 years of experience. I've done many advanced research projects. I'd like to have Chris Morley, who's a younger human factors expert, just talk briefly about his experience with these advanced methods. And Chris is our Director of Medical Products. Chris, you want to just give us a quick overview of your view on all of this, because you've been on the leading, sort of the bleeding edge here.
Sure thing. Thanks, Charles. So as Charles mentioned, I'm research director at Mauro Usability Science, and I've directed numerous studies at this point using both traditional methods as well as our advanced methods that we present here today. Our clients are always impressed by the level of detail we are able to reach with our advanced methods in terms of explaining the why behind the behaviors we observe and capture during usability testing. This level of detail greatly enhances the insights we are able to draw from our studies and the recommendations we generate for total device system optimization. Now, quickly speaking from the perspective of a moderator, running the studies in lab, iMotions data integration makes it much easier to collect data from multiple data streams simultaneously. So prior to adopting iMotions, our moderators had to start and stop each individual data collection system for each trial, and then time sync the data in post-processing. So when you're managing moderation, participant safety, and other tasks, this can be a lot to manage. So with iMotions, all of the data streams are automatically synced, and this really decreases the workload of the moderator and increases the quality of the data. So there are challenges that come with using these advanced methods. As Charles mentioned, it requires rigorous bench testing and calibration, as well as training the staff up on the methods. However, it's clear that the benefits of these methods greatly outweigh the challenges in terms of what we're able to deliver to our clients.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Did you have another question, Thomas, at this point? Or
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions here.
Okay.
So are you able to elaborate more on eye tracking metrics, for example, when working with instructions for use?
Sure. Instructions for use in eye tracking are an invaluable, just an incredible combination. The primary issue with the utilization of eye tracking is that many researchers who use the technology, these are mostly less experienced human factors, firms, design firms that have human factors groups, tend not to understand how to set up the eye tracking effectively, how to set the areas of interest, and then post-processing is really what's important. So you utilize the eye tracking data for one really important methodology, and that is to validate essential step errors and critical error linkages. So you tie it together with actual behavior, you see what they're looking at, but you also use it to validate the essential step errors. And we use it on all of our studies for instructions for use going forward.
Great, thanks. Another one here regarding pain. Can you get meaningful comfort pain data when the occurrence is accumulative due to repetition versus instantaneous, like with an injection?
Yeah, wonderful question. Yes, you can. And the way that we've done that, and in fact, we have a large study currently that we're undertaking related to a wearable device. The way you do that actually is when the respondent comes back in a longitudinal study, you set them up with a data capture in Affectiva, and your debrief questions that are structured in such a way that you utilize the backup Affectiva system and their emotional channels to track against the debrief questions. So what you see is the longitudinal repeat questions as they come back over a week or a month or 2 or 3 months. You can correlate the Affectiva data with the actual cumulative pain data, or a better way to put it, if it's longitudinal, it's usually not pain, it's discomfort, at a relative level.
Great. Yeah, I think just one more here. And so what toolbox of sensors do you typically recommend to clients? Are there tiers you offer different research questions?
Yeah, okay, good. That's the last slide, actually. So okay. I have this is sort of what we've learned over the last 10 years doing this. I would say that our learning curve, though, and the general quality and cost effectiveness of our services entered an entirely new era after iMotion showed up. So these are what we learned. Learning the system takes time. Don't expect this to happen overnight. when you buy your iMotion system, you're going to be working with it for a while. The initial investment is more than hardware. This is extremely important. The individuals who use this system are going to want to have the time and the freedom to truly understand what's going on, because it's not observational data any longer. It's a true data stream coming in. It has frequency requirements. It has noise. It has, all these various attributes that needs to be considered. We always tell our research colleagues to start with a small number of sensors, and we have various levels, various tiers of studies. Our most basic study usually combines eye tracking, microfacial, GSR. That's sort of the entry level palette. We like to also include EMG. And then the next tier going up from that in terms of complexity is Newtonian force and 3D spatial tracking. Those studies take a whole nother level of expertise in terms of designing the study, hardware, integrating the sensors in with your products. And then finally, there's a third tier, which includes EEG and more what I would characterize as hardcore neuroscience. Those studies require a lot more time in the field, because if you're using EEG, for example, you have to use at least a 36 sensor EEG setup. That takes at least an hour to instrument the respondent, calibrate everything, and get the system running properly. So those are much more complex studies. So 3 tiers generally, but you can do wonderful studies with eye tracking, GSR, microfacial, and yeah, probably EMG. EMG is a little more complex though. Staff your team properly. It is a science. This is not intuition. It's not a design problem. It's not necessarily a usability problem. Also, although iMotions makes the system actually extremely easy to use, sometimes I think too easy. Pilot test everything. We pilot test our studies. If we have a 5-day study, we'll pilot test for 3 days before we run the actual study. You have to make sure that everything is synced up properly and running. Calibrate everything. We calibrate between every study, every respondent, and that's non-negotiable. Don't trust what all the vendors tell you, except iMotions. They'll give you the brutal truth. But if you're buying, for example, an EEG setup, they're going to tell you that the level of resolution of their technology is at some level. I guarantee you it's probably not. So always go to other research colleagues who you trust, who purchased that equipment before, and get their feedback. Only use vendors with validated experience. Don't waste your time trying to save money on this. It'll kill you on the human capital side. The methods still require human factors science. So if you think that you're going to apply these methods without still applying robust human factors engineering research, insight, and education, you're wrong. These are really nothing more than very robust tools. And my final point is that benefits raise all boats. These studies that we've done have dramatically improved the role of human factors science within the corporation. They've improved clinical outcomes. They've improved profit by producing some wonderful solutions. And at the end of the day, it's just amazingly interesting work to do at this level if you're dealing with medical products. Okay, thank you, everyone. Kate, Thomas, do we have other questions?
Yeah, I think we're gonna do a poll next, and then maybe ask a question while the poll results are coming in.
Okay.
So yeah, we'd like to know how we can follow up with everybody. So please let us know. We'd love to get back in touch with you. And so the question, Charles, let me see here. Oh, so how do you ensure clean data capture for facial expression or other sensors when respondents may be moving?
Well, that's an age-old problem. And what we learned about Affectiva, and Affectiva is really the big one, because motion in Affectiva, whether Affectiva admits it or not, creates problems with the data. So what we've actually had to do was conduct a series of experiments utilizing Affectiva in lab, not with client projects, but in a bench test, series of bench tests. And we had to optimize the lighting around Affectiva and the facial expressions. And we actually retained a professional photographer and a lighting expert to help us with this. And once we were able to optimize the lighting, the noise related to head movement diminished very dramatically. So that's one way you can do it. Now, we don't really see big motion artifacts in our products when we test it, like either EMG. That's there can be artifacts in there for that. If you do a Fourier fast transform on your stats, you can identify where that is. What else? We really don't see motion artifacts as a big problem in these studies. A bigger problem is making sure that the respondent is comfortable with the various systems that may be attached to them. EMG sensors, for example, those are wireless, low weight EMG sensors. They're no longer a problem, but in the old days, you had cable bound EMG systems, with all kinds of transducers. All of that was a much more difficult problem. So in general, we don't see motion artifact as a major issue, except in Affectiva, and you optimize the lighting, you solve that problem.
Great, wonderful. Thank you. Yes. So I think, yep, the polls have, I think it's been closed. Yep. So we have information from people on how we here at iMotions can get in touch with you, or how the folks over at Mauro can get in touch with you. And I think that's everything for today. Thank you all very much for joining us.